Let's talk about the magic circle.
Let's talk about the magic circle. So you can make a magic circle out of any sort of grain of sand, salt, etc.
Keeps out demons.
As long as you have enough.
Witches. Keeps out witches.
It does keep out witches.
Ghosts. Ghouls. Not goblins.
Not goblins.
No.
Distraction makers.
So we've been reading Rules of Play lately by Katie Salen and Eric Zimmerman, and there is a particular section that talks about something called the magic circle. The magic circle is the sort of invisible, generally agreed upon contract that players enter into when they have a shared experience of playing a particular game.
It's almost like entering the world of the game, right? And within this circle, the things that the game rules deem important, we as people also decide are important. These things that are basically arbitrary, right? Like in basketball, you're trying to get a ball in a hoop, where here that is honored as, oh, you get that's a success, right? That's a good thing that you did that. You get points associated with how you got the ball in the hoop. Whereas if we're outside of the magic circle, it has no particular meaning in reality.
Someone could get it in the hoop, and for all you know, because you don't understand what the context is, they actually lost the game. I don't know. Or they lost points, whatever.
So the magic circle not only is the like explicit rules of the game, meaning like, well, if I make a basket in basketball, it's worth points. It's also the implicit rules of sort of the meta game, right? The conversations about the game, where players might kind of have developed accepted norms that aren't necessarily parts of the rules of the game, but those are also part of the culture of the game, which is included in the magic circle. But it's almost something you have to, as a new player, you almost have to like learn them over time.
We've talked previously in other videos about the meat method, which is something we talk about when we're evaluating games generally to understand like what their overall impact or feeling might be as you're experiencing them.
And MEAT stands for Marketing, Experience, Analysis, and Takeaways.
And the magic circle is sort of hovering around, honestly, it might encompass the majority of the MEAT method in this, but particularly the marketing aspect, which we sort of have as marketing as if there is an alignment with the expectation that a player has when entering into a game.
From a design perspective, I think this aligns with, you setting the expectations of your players for the type of experience that they're entering into when they're entering your particular game's magic circle, right? So this probably sits between the marketing and the experience sections of the MEAT method, right? Which is, here are the expectations of the magic circle, and then the experiences you actually experiencing being inside of the magic circle, and whether or not your systems are honoring the expectations that you created. A game that has pulled this off well, and this one in particular is informed by context of previous games, because we're talking about Dark Souls and Elden Ring, where Dark Souls has a very clear magic circle, which is you are entering into a game that is challenging, that is going to be trying for you, that you as a player in the community of players are expecting a particular type of challenge and a particular type of payoff for rising to the occasion. Right?
And it took them years to build this too, right? It's not just like one game, Demon Souls comes out and everyone suddenly expects all their games to be like that. After several games though, when the new game gets announced, people are like, oh my God, I can't wait to die a lot. Like people get excited about the challenge.
And you're pointing out something interesting about this this particular magic circle is that people who start to enter it are ones who are attracted to that experience. So that not only is this a circle that the game's rules and systems have created for players, it's also a reputational circle, right? Like, oh, and that's part of the metagame, right? Is that you're entering a FromSoft game. There's particular expectations and assumptions that come with that, right? Not all FromSoft, but Souls-like FromSoft. And so when we get to Elden Ring expands the Souls-like magic circle, right? It's opening it up to more players.
It is the most new player-friendly experience as far as Souls-like or FromSoft games go. And it kind of rubbed a lot of players the wrong way. But I think that, we talked about it. I think it's the minority of players that were sort of disappointed by Elden Ring. And I think FromSoft did a very good job with expanding this magic circle, expanding the space for players to come in and experience their game, by still making at the baseline their game is difficult. If you walk up to something, it will kill you in a second or two if you don't do anything. That's generally difficult in comparison to any other game on the market, and is similar to the past games that they've made. The only difference is that they've now given you, as a new player, an opportunity to go and explore and grow without having to constantly just hit yourself against a brick wall until you're good enough at playing their game.
And what's, I think, really well done in sort of the expansion of Elden Ring's Magic Circle is they are honoring the sort of previous expectations of players, in that you can play Elden Ring in a very similar way to other Dark Souls games. I think there is some criticism that's been levied against them because Elden Ring played in that way is very difficult. and I think a lot of like players are like, this is basically impossible. I can't predict the moves in the same way because the bosses are so bombastic or whatever, right? So unpredictable. But what they have done is created a system, which is something we talk about a lot, which is that the sort of the systems that the game designers have made are what can facilitate these different experiences. The system that Elden Ring has created is one where players can make the choice, right? Where you can participate in this magic circle in the same way that you're used to if you choose to, but you also can choose to experience how the circle has been broadened. As you said, instead of beating my head against the wall, I can go explore. I can go level up. I can go find particular items that help make these boss fights easier, like Margit's Shackle. In this way, I think Elden Ring has masterfully navigated this experience for both veteran players and new players in allowing the players themselves to make the choice. There is no forced hand anywhere. They're not suddenly forcing Dark Souls veterans to like play a game that's like got kitty gloves on. No.
Right. It's not like Margit is easier because they're like, well, it's the first boss. Let's make sure that the first boss isn't too difficult. They did the opposite. They made the first boss like harder than probably most FromSoft first initial bosses.
We could do a whole video just on Margit, and we probably should at some point.
So good.
So I think this is really when we take that sort of framework that we established with Elden Ring and we start to look at Magic and Commander under that same context, right? And I don't really want to say whether something is good or bad. That like, however, like obviously the way that like players want to play the game, and that influences the Magic Circle, right? Like we can see it expand with Commander, right? Where the circle for traditional Magic was one where the sort of explicit rules of the game were quite clear, and the game was played in a way, at least in the public eye, in terms of like, okay, we're professional level tournaments and things. The game is being played in a way where the explicit rules of the game were the driving force. It was, you have 20 life, I have 20 life, we're both trying to get each other to zero in whatever best strategic way we think is correct. And then we're doing that to figure out who's better at doing that, right? That is the goal. That's the explicit rules of the game. That's the goal of the players.
But now things have changed a little bit.
Now things have changed, right? So the Magic Circle has expanded to include some, with Commander, some implicit rules, right? Which is the thing that I think some veteran players are butt up against, myself included.
I was going to say, are you going to talk about you're going to share your experience here?
What experience?
Well, just to
just generally, yeah. I mean, I've shared it plenty of times on the channel before, but it again, it's like, it's not that I can't play Magic casually, right? Like I've played Magic casually the entire time, like throughout my experience playing Magic. It's that what has always struck me as odd with the Commander community is that it's the insistence on this is how the game is meant to be played, right?
Sure. Where it's saying you can't fit in our Magic Circle because our Magic Circle has these bounds. That's what we're saying is existing, those bounds are, well, you shouldn't play a second board wipe if it's, this far in the game, or just that like the goal of the game is not what the rules say it is. It's that we say the goal is for everybody to have fun, which is subjective, right? Like it's not to say that like that can't be a goal. It's just that that's a harder one to achieve. The thing that I think bothers me most about this situation is the Magic Circle initially being created for 1v1 traditional Magic and then expanding to include Commander. And then when the Commander community begins to expand again to a competitive community in CEDH, that's when we start to see this like resistance to expanding the circle further. And I'm like, okay, well, you can't come into a circle that already existed, expand it for yourself, and then not let it expand again for others. That doesn't make sense. What's really interesting is that circle, when players are upset about it, right? Let's look at the Elden Ring drama, right? Of people being upset or judging players for using Mimic Tiers, right? You and I, both proud Mimic Tier users, all right? There's no shame in it. But
little shame.
But what's really interesting is that when you hear a lot of the discourse, a lot of it is because players that have played a lot of FromSoft games, really enjoy the challenge, view that as a sort of easy way out, right? It's butting up against what their expectations are of the fantasy of what's promised to them.
Well, and let me interject real quick with what I think, if I'm looking at their concern in good faith, I think that they are targeting this as a player robbing themselves of an authentic
right.
experience.
That's what a lot of them
is that Dark Souls experience.
They think to themselves, well, I remember when I was trying to challenge myself and get good and improve, that felt really good for me. I had to do that. I think you should have to experience that as well.
Or not even that you should have to. I think in some ways, like some people are that way, but I think some people, and again, I'm likening this to myself in competitive Magic, where I'm like, well, these experiences that I had in competitive Magic were so formative and important to me that I want other people to be able to experience them. Where in Elden Ring, if I'm again looking in good faith, I do think someone could come from that perspective, right? Of if you're using the Mimic Tier, you're robbing yourself of the authentic Dark Souls experience.
Those players then, when that magic circle is beginning to expand, try to maintain it. And they're like, well, no, this is what the circle encompasses, right? And so what you're saying with Magic and what's happening is that, like you said, it expanded once and it's expanding again. And now we're seeing that from the sort of opposite end. Now we're seeing a casual player base saying, no, you can't play our format competitively because this is what our format is. Even though there's players that are proving that there's more possibilities and that you can push the format in a different direction. But we're going to see, it's like this, it's almost a repeated pattern that you might see probably throughout other games as well, is that, especially as it broadens to a wider audience, as most games and game franchises usually do, is you're going to see backlash from the audience that is saying, well, no, this is the current circle lines. You need to come meet us.
Well, we're talking about the paradox of skill for a minute. This is something that we're talking about in terms of how you can design systems to help welcome people across that line, right? So the magic circle is there, and it might be intimidating to cross into that world. But if you have systems that act as a release valve for it, randomness, in Elden Ring's case, exploration, right? There's these things and systems that you can design to help people cross into that space and then become a part of the community that exists there, instead of sort of like demanding that the ring accommodate you, right? It's that the systems are already in place to do that.
That's how I felt playing Elden Ring.
Yeah.
Is I played Bloodborne and I played for 8-10 hours, something like that. Didn't finish the game, kind of fell off of it. And the whole time it felt like a slog. It felt like it was very challenging. And it never quite clicked for me. And I think I started to see and hear from other players that, well, you should go and explore. But what ended up happening with Bloodborne is that if you went to explore, you would just go and explore and find another very challenging thing at a certain point. So the whole game still had this like feeling of anxiety and anxiousness, but in a way that I just felt like I was scared all the time. And like there was no possibility of me turning the corner. Whereas Elden Ring, due to its exploration, also I think the mount has a huge part in this as well, allows the player to sort of do these almost like cheese tactics as they sort of dip their toe into the waters of challenge. And now at the other end of it, 100+ hours into Elden Ring, I feel like I'm a god when I start a new game. I'm like killing things like it's nothing.
Margit?
Yeah.
Who is this guy?
I kill Margit the first try. Most times I replay.
Yeah. But I want to talk a little bit about the idea of honoring the magic circle from a design perspective.
Yeah.
And the sort of contract or expectations that you enter with your players in terms of like, again, with the meat method, we look at, marketing leads to experience, and that space in between is when the player enters the magic circle with the expectations that you created through the marketing, and now they're actually experiencing whether or not you have fulfilled your promise, right? And so this is an instance where you can see a lot of like dissonance between a system that's been created based on like the intended experience and then synthesized through the system, and the outcomes showing up as not fulfilling the thing. And the best example here is in something like a game where it's like promising a grand fulfilling adventure, and then it ends up just being like microtransaction hell, right? Like that is probably the most extreme example of not honoring the magic circle. I do wonder how much of this is at the core of where sort of I guess I could say veteran video game players or veteran game players at this point are feeling so disenfranchised with what's happening in the industry is they can remember a time when the Magic Circle was sacred and it was a promise that was being presented and then fulfilled. And now I would even say that like games that release half finished are also violating the Magic Circle.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
But that even goes beyond games. Maybe that's more like that's a product fulfillment, right? At that point, it's like the thing just doesn't function. You bought a product and it shows up and it's broken. Like that's not good. Right. But I do think that the some of the design trends that we've seen where you can have the aesthetics of saying I'm presenting this to you as this particular Magic Circle or whatever, however you want to cross the line into this experience that I'm promising you, and I'm really just luring you in, right, so that you're going to be spending all of your time and money here, right?
I played the shit out of Astrobot
Sure.
on my vacation, on my break. And Astrobot, I think, is one of those games that absolutely fulfills on the marketing side of things. On honestly, everything. Astrobot, when using the meat method, might be like top tier.
Like top tier? Okay. I haven't played it yet, so I'm taking your word for it.
I will force you at some point. The thing that I think it succeeded so well at doing is that it really it cuts a lot of the fat, trims a lot of the fat. A lot of the times when we end up hopping in a game now, it usually ends up taking a while for you to end up getting to that point that you feel fulfilled.
When the promise that was made was fulfilled?
Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's due to narrative constraints, right? So if it's a narratively driven game, it takes a long time for that exposition to get to that point, right? You look at a game like Doom 2016 that just gets straight to it.
Straight to it. Yeah.
Yep. Doom 2016 is fantastic in that like you wanted to play a Doom game, you launch it,
you got
playing a Doom game right now.
Yeah.
And Astrobot, I think, does that very similarly. In that I think it's the only argument I'll say is like right in the first couple minutes, I'd maybe say like you don't even need that. But otherwise, if what you're playing is fun, lighthearted, not serious, and just absolute like overall joy is probably their like major pillar or theme if they had one, it's fulfilling it every single second that you are playing that game.
One thing I want to say about the marketing and the experience part of the meat method is the marketing goes both ways, right? You want to manage the expectations. It's not necessarily about raising them as big as possible.
Right. Yeah, that's a huge issue.
It's like the Fable guy, Peter Molyneux or whatever. He's always like, Fable's going to be the biggest, craziest game ever, and it's going to be multiplayer, and it's going to be this, and then it didn't ever pay off, right?
Right.
But I mean, that's just like an extreme example. But what I mean is that like if you're sort of like writing checks that your game doesn't cash, you're setting yourself up for failure, and once you move into the past the line into the Magic Circle, into the experience, where you can manage those expectations better by not over promising and saying like, okay, like Doom 2016 is a perfect example where it's like there are expectations going into Doom. It's actually a really interesting contrast between, was it Doom Eternals, the one after that?
Yeah.
That's a great contrast, right? Where Doom 2016 is like, this is Doom. These are the exact expectations. We're delivering on the exact experience.
Doom Eternal was at a huge disadvantage because after Doom 2016, it wasn't just, well, that's Doom. Now there's Doom, and then what?
Now it's Doom Plus.
Right. And what does that mean?
You're setting yourself up for trouble, basically. Yeah. And I think that game was decent.
I think it did really well. I really liked it. If you listen to the behind the scenes of 2016 too, they talk a lot about how like the narrative was something they thought a lot about, and at a certain point after months of development, they were just like, why do we have it?
Yeah.
Like
what is it?
What's the point of this? And so instead they just ended up like taking a bunch of jabs at even the inclusion of narrative,
which is kind of what some of the original Doom stuff did, right? It's like you're like looking for your pet bunny or something. Like that's the whole the whole story. Right?
It's just a great example. Maybe we should just do a whole video on Doom 2016 at some point. But it's a great example, and if you listen to the designers talk about this, what they talk about is that they tried to put the player. They tried to think of the player and the player's position as the protagonist, which we talk a lot about players protagonist, and I think that's a really personally, that's my favorite way that games are usually designed and handled. And what they thought of in any moment is like, how would the player feel right now? If the player's like, I don't want to hear the story, like what would be the equivalent of skipping a cutscene? One of them early on in 2016
Doom, it's like in the game, right?
It's in the game, there's exposition that starts coming up on a screen, and it takes, I think, maybe 5 seconds, and you're camera goes around, and then you grab the TV and you just chuck it.
And
you don't even hear all that they have to say. Right. Most of what you hear is in an elevator that's taking you to the next level.
That's so good.
It's great. It's so good.
So let's talk about takeaways, and we can kind of wrap this up.
The Magic Circle it's definitely something you designed for, but it's something that is just going to exist. You could relay it somewhat to target demographics in a way, but I think it's mostly in how you're going to design your game to expand and contract that particular Magic Circle, and how are players culturally feeling about what your game is generally promising. Is your game promising too much, or is that going to align with players' expectations when they cross into that circle?
Well, and I think understanding the game you're making is so important. Not only the game itself, but your players' expectations of what your Magic Circle will be. Understanding, again, not only just the rules of the game you're making, but also the perceived meta that exists before your game is even introduced to the audience, right? They're bringing expectations with them. And also understanding that this bond that you're creating with your players is sacred, right? You are there's so much trust that's being put in you as a designer to honor the experience that you've said that you're going to give your players, and making sure that you maintain their trust. And I think maintaining their trust and maintaining the Magic Circle for your players is really sort of like the baseline recipe for a successful game.
And if you do expand it, make sure you're always considering who's those base players that were part of that initial Magic Circle.
Right. Yeah. And is there a way for you to intelligently expand it to honor both veterans and new players alike?
Right. Just design like Elden Ring.
Yeah.
Easy.
Just do Elden Ring.
Yeah.
Just do an Elden Ring.
Just do an Elden Ring. Everyone else is.
Well, thanks for watching our video about the Magic Circle. Give us a like and subscribe. And if you want to talk any more about the things we're talking about here, you can join our Discord. The link is in the description below.
Bye.
We'll see you next time.